The production of this video was made possible by donors to the Orchestration Online Patreon initiative. Please consider adding your support to the creation of free educational internet resources by visiting our Patreon page linked below.
Hey there, this is your orchestration tutor, Thomas Goss, bringing you the fourth collection or compilation of entries of website subscribers for the 2022 Orchestration Challenge, Orchestrating the Prelude in G by Vasil Barvinsky. And we're starting off here with Andrew's very wonderful, just simple, elegant score. I think that it's a really, really great, kind of breakout score, a very safe kind of scoring. You're using very simple, direct textures. I think that this being played by, just by live instruments in an orchestra, I think it would sound really, really cool. However, I would challenge you, Andrew, to think about, to go back and watch my lecture on my own arrangement and think about the evaluation criteria that I have listed at the beginning of this video, right? So if we think about some of those, especially for this beginning here, my question is, does the treatment of the melody represent an emotional and timbral progression? So looking at it all together, it kind of stays in the same place. So my concern here with this approach would be, would we sort of feel like we're not really going forwards, right? If you listen to the emotional contrast in this same exact stretch of music in the piano score, you can hear that there are all kinds of wonderful little nuances and colors and other kinds of things that the pianist plays just in these first 10 bars. So how can we sort of not imitate it or replicate it, but how can we live up to that level of expression and nuance and subtlety, right? So a lot of what you're doing here is really, really workable. I like the bassoons in here. I like the doubling of the bassoons with the A clarinets. I think that this works really, really well at the ending, the trading off of those parts and so on. Just that all works fine. You haven't done anything wrong, right? But I'm wondering whether or not the dynamics could have been louder here, right? Could this have pushed all the way up to a mezzo forte? Because when you change the dynamic of an instrument, you are also changing the quality of the texture, right? Because the sound is different. The sound of a soft violin versus a loud violin. There's really a change of there's really is a change of timbre and texture in that, right? The quality is really different. So could you have taken this further dynamically? Then another question I would have for you here is, what do you feel is happening here in the second flute? What is the second flute contributing here? Now, since everybody's playing very softly here, and you just really have this texture is very, very simple. It is all just wind instruments. In this case, my objections about the second flute really not being able to contribute very much are not as huge a concern, except for when we get down here to these F sharps and E's, right? At that point, the contribution to the texture of the second flute is minimal at best. You would be better off having the second flute jump here and play A2 with the first flutes, because it really isn't doing anything down here especially where the oboe is just so powerful in its resonance. Now, you can have the oboe player playing really softly, but that doesn't mean that the power of its resonance is going away. That the way that those low, rich notes are playing are any less rich just because the player is making an effort to make them a little softer, right? And then especially right here, where you've got this flute continuing on, the second flute, it really, how much is it really contributing to the texture? Even though you're kind of taking away, you're easing off with the oboe here, which is a welcome, it is welcome, and it makes this feel like a destination note by the first oboe player. You still have the first clarinet sitting on that, and you have the first bassoon sitting on that note, right? So there really is like almost zero need for the flute player to contribute just like there isn't really a whole lot happening. They'd be better off playing A2 up here or just not playing at all. Right? So really think about this. I'm seeing this in so many scores. Octave flutes, right? And what's happening at the same time as the octave flutes? Very dense, rich scoring in winds and sometimes in strings and brass as well. So what does that mean? Why the decision to do the octave flutes if that second flute, the flute below, is really not going to contribute very much? If you listen to, if you really pay attention to all the instruments in your mock-up, largely speaking, the mock-ups are telling you the truth when it comes to the disappearance of the second flute in a lot of these textures that are being orchestrated. So, why the need to put in a second flute so low in textures where there just really is rich, expressive music happening? And especially if you take my advice and push this up to a mezzo forte in here, the other instruments are really going to bury that second flute. All right, so then right in here, you could really hear when the horn came in, and part of it is the mock-up, right? It's not doing you any favors. The simulated orchestra that you're using, it's a bit nuts and bolts. It's a bit crude to be a little inelegant about it, compared to, say, Note Performer or other alternate kinds of mock-ups, mock-up sound sets. I think that Sibelius would do a better job. The Sibelius 32 gigabyte sounds, which is now up to, I don't know, it's gotten bigger or smaller or something. But yeah, I think that the quality of the tones here are just they're very unadorned, and they're very kind of in your face, right? They don't have a lot of restraint to them. But I will say one thing. I like the way that you have taken pains to solve certain problems. Like, you don't have slurs over repeated notes for the most part. You aren't just dumping the piano-style slurring onto the winds for the most part. Sometimes you have something like this, right? But it just seems more workable and more natural to the wind instruments in a lot of places. Some of the slurring. But, slurring across the downbeat, do you really want to have nobody tonguing on the downbeat ever? Except for right here, right? Or right here. So, think about those those particular things. So, okay, so back to the horn. Like, you solve all these problems just by marking this pianissimo, right? And once again, like, I don't want to be the guy who's always saying mark your brass down, because you don't always have to do that. In fact, you don't have to do it even that often, except that people are scoring their horns and their brass in really close proximity to what's happening in the other instruments. So naturally, you have to tame those. You have to pull back on the dynamics if you want certain things to balance and merge seamlessly. And this would be one case. And then it just doesn't become this big, blatting sounding G, black, just kind of taking over this beautiful texture that you have planned in here, right, Andrew? All right, so now let's move on to the next page, which I thought was really, really fun. Now, why doesn't the harp have a big, beautiful slur over it, right? I would actually slur from this pitch to this pitch, right? So just like this is all one thing. And there's no need to break up the beam groups, right? This could just be, just beam normally, right? That by having a flagged eighth note here, you are almost saying to the player, there's something special about this note that needs to be disconnected from this note. So yeah, so just have regular beam groups like this, right? And then have like one long slur mark going up to here. Now here I would say, yeah, you could disconnect the flag, like the eighth note from this beam group, right? Just have a flag eighth note. If you have one big slur over this, right? And that just really shows the player, oh yeah, you're having these big, beautiful, gorgeous gushing lines. All right, so my only worry about this, having the harp kind of take the place of the left hand of the piano. This is my worry about this, Andrew, and I want you to think about this really carefully. And that is, are all of these pitches in the harp pacing out the big, beautiful expression of this by having one punctuated note after another? The punctuation here is the sound of the pluck, right? So by going pluck, 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 after a while it's just doink, 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 doink throughout all 8 bars. So, as you listen to your mock-up, does that sound a little too regular to you, too mechanical, right? Now, of course, when the players play this, they will actually be thinking about things like that, and they will make it sound a little bit more natural, but they can't be too natural because they're all playing together, right? The harpist is playing at exactly the same time as your lower strings and everything else. So it's just I guess it is what it is, right? To quote a great philosopher. So what's the name of that philosopher? Mediocrities. That's right. So just really watch out for things like that might actually have less of a poetic effect on the music rather than more poetic. Now I think this is kind of cool, like this low tuba part. It's kind of sort of foghornish in a way, just but it's not bad. I think it's kind of fun, just like having that underpinning every single time. But like once again, you have to ask like how long do you want certain things to go on, right? It's all about proportions. So this is what I want you to think about for, like, Andrew. I have a job for you. So at the end of the job, there is going to be another orchestration challenge, right? That will be in the year 2023. But between now and then, right, since you have contributed previously to these orchestration challenges, I'm hoping that you will continue to contribute. Between now and then, I want you to think about the proportions of passages, of sections in orchestral scoring. How long does an orchestrator maintain the same strategy? Right? So think about that and look at a bunch of scoring like, I would say like Prokofiev's First Violin Concerto, or like Beethoven's Sixth Symphony, or like Tchaikovsky's Fifth Symphony, or maybe like Venus by Holst. So study works like that, and just think, how long does the same approach go on, right? And when the approach changes, what does that mean, right? How does that change the emotion of the music? All right? Because I'm thinking, like, I think you have you have strong instincts and you have really great ideas, okay? But I'm thinking that, like, you could make those ideas stronger, right? By like having more of them, more contrast, more approaches that lead to other approaches, right? So, like, for instance, here you're bringing in the winds and the horns, and I think that works really, really great. I think that, like, that's an example of the context changing and of, like, new life coming into this, and that's just a wonderful, wonderful thing. But, like, I'm thinking of that previous section, like the prologue, like, where pretty much the same approach stayed in place for, like, the whole page, right? So, how could your style of orchestrating improve by using changes and of color and of approach to to make the expressiveness of the idea more apparent, more on the surface, and so that things are kind of less calculated, less automatic. Like, once you've set up what the harp is going to do, just continue that for the whole page. Once you've set up what the lower strings are going to do, even though, like, this is really great. I love the idea of this, the trading off and the dovetailing and everything like that. I think that's very strong. But, like, how long should it go on? Okay, just a couple little notes about layout here. If you have a bracket here, then the bar line should match the bracket, right? So this should be one bar line, but there shouldn't be a bar line connecting it to the harp, right? Stuff like that. So just watch out for that. Probably was just like one of those things that just came up in the processing of the score. But other than that, nicely laid out. So, like, let's look at some of those issues, right? So you've got the harp doubling the double basses and cellos working together, and this is kind of a nice way of scoring it out. But I think that it would be even smoother if these players were actually trading off on pitches, right? So if this C sharp were starting here on this, and they were slurred across, and then this D were part of this part, and then the upper divisi cellos and they were picking it up and slurring into it, right? So I think that, like, if that way, so because here you're dovetailing on this pitch, so why aren't you dovetailing on this pitch and this pitch, right? So I think they should all dovetail. Like, right here, you have the dovetailing, but here you don't, right? So I think more dovetailing is in order here, all right, just to make it much more smooth. Now, here we've got something that I find just really interesting and charming, and that is we've got like a double 6/3 chord kind of approach, right? So, like, the original thing is just like the B octave with the other pitches below it, making it seem to be a 6/3 chord. It's actually like when you consider the harmonic context, it's something else. But we'll just use that structure as a frame, right? So we actually, Andrew, what you did here, of course, obviously, is like you just did divisi octaves for everything, and so you have them stacked together. So you end up with a really, really thick sound. In fact, it reminds me a lot of, like, some of those early 20th century string serenade, string orchestra pieces, like, and also going back into the Romantic period, like the Holberg Suite by Grieg, and like some of the string scoring by Vaughan Williams and and by Strauss and so on. So yeah, so just like where lots of voices are being used at once, and there's this real heartfelt sound, right? But you have to be careful that it doesn't become organ-like, right? It doesn't have that And you haven't gotten quite to that point with this, so that's all fine. And then these little rolls and the timpani are all great. So right here, and so you bring in your octave flutes, right? And I would very politely submit to you that you could get a better sound here, way better sound, way stronger, much more natural to the instruments, and a much richer sound if you had A2 flutes on the top pitch and you had a single oboe on the bottom pitch. And I think that you would get a beautifully, just a wonderfully moderated, combined sound here, as opposed to putting the weaker second flute on these lower pitches and just having it just kind of disappear or just being a little footnote to the other pitches, right? And then here you have the horns coming in and adding some of this richness while you kind of continue on with some similar strategies in these octaves in the violins and the violas. Just absolutely no critique of that. And I think this is actually the strongest part of the whole score. I think like you really were on a roll at this point, right? So yeah, when you feel that, when you get to the point where you really feel like you're on a roll with your scoring, you really are accomplished something, you're saying something, you are in the groove, you've really gotten to that point, think about what makes that great. Then go back and look at the previous parts of your score once you've finished up, right? Okay, so poco a poco crescendo, you don't really need, if you have the hairpin, you don't need the sign. So just have hairpins, and it should be for everybody, right? You can't push everybody up to mezzo forte and then just leave your poor pianissimo bassoons in the dust, right? Or harp, right? Still tootling along here at mezzo piano. And, by the time it gets to here, it's mezzo piano sounding, compared to the rest of the orchestra is like a piano dynamic, right? It'll get buried. So you should push it up to forte here. I would say push this up to forte, push the strings, all the strings up to mezzo forte, all the winds up to mezzo forte. And then, I would treat the bassoons a lot like the tuba, right? So, here you have pianissimo tubas, and then the horns coming in at piano, I would say have them be pianissimo as well, right? And then here, they can go crescendo up to a piano or mezzo piano right in here. And the same thing, just have it be across the bassoons and the tuba and everything else. Then I think you have a really beautifully balanced score. So think about all the suggestions, make a copy of your file, drop them into your score, and see if that helps, right? Think about all the different little things. If it makes it clearer, easier to read, if the mock-up sounds better, things like that. So watch out for things like this. The tempo should go above the violins. And this is just another indication of problems in the score layout and so on and so forth. But yeah, and this should also go above the flutes too. So just little bitsy things like that. So people are going to catch other things that I missed or didn't have time to talk about, and I really am hoping that they will mention them below. Especially with these compilations, they're just so great. They're like big parties sometimes. There are 80 comments or 100 comments under the first one under A, right? So look, if everybody, at least everybody in this video, everybody whose pieces are in this video were to comment about each other's pieces, right? Then that would be enough to get the party started, and hopefully bring in more people, especially other website subscribers who have gotten their evaluations by now or who are about to get theirs. So I just keep the party going, folks. All right, I really, really appreciate that, and thanks so much to you, Andrew, for sending me this very, very fun, very imaginative score. But just once again, I would say, imagination, you're proving right here that you got it, right? Jump back to that first page, see if you can exercise that imagination in ways that bring a little bit more variety into this, and that the variety brings more meaning into it, right? That's what I would challenge you to do here. And I think especially thinking ahead to the challenges that are coming up, right? The very poetic piece that we're going to look at in 2024, the really solid, intense piece that we're going to look at. Actually, you have a choice of two different options next year, and then the explosion of options that we're going to have in 3 years. So all of that, I think, is going to challenge you and make you even better orchestrator, and to encourage you to add different tools to your box of goodies that you use in scoring right now. All right, so thank you so much. Now on to the next evaluation. That's really great, Eli. I love this score. Just a few little notes very quickly on layout and so on. Sending me these evaluations and so on. As people will see, this is really small and staff size, and it's totally fine for you to have 2 pages, right? For this to be on 1 page with a bigger staff size, and this could be the next page with a larger staff size as well, right? So that it's easier just to look at the 2 pages and so on and so forth. I really like what you're doing here. So here's an example of flutes in octaves, like playing softly along with clarinets. And here it works because there's nothing else there. Like there's nothing else in the sound picture. There's nothing really to interfere too much with the second flute in a very weak register. Of course, it would be a lot stronger if that were English horn or oboe or something like that. But it still does work, right? It's not the most ideal combination in the world, but it does keeps things very very square wave, right? If you know what I mean, just very tooty, a very cool sound. You could make it even cooler, not like in the essence of coolness, right? Like from the 50s forwards, that kind of cool. But you could make it like a cooler timbre by telling the flutes to play like non-vibrato, right? Just to make it really, so to match the clarinets and just being really plain. But I don't think that's what you want. I think you want this to be expressive on top and maybe cool on the bottom. So that'll all work fine. So it's interesting, here I've been kind of crabbing and grousing about people just dropping the piano style phrasing onto the winds and strings, but you've completely done away with that. You have like a very articulated style. Like there's almost no slurring whatsoever, right, on anything. So yeah, I mean I sort of miss them, right? I'm wondering if this could be like maybe a portato, da, da, da. You know what I mean? Just like having a sort of kind of a lift, like just slurring across the tenuto marks, for instance. And the same thing here. Da, 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 da. Yeah, and I really love the way that the octave oboes take over from the octave flutes, right? So like here's where the imbalance is, right? So with the octave, the trade-off from the first flute to the oboe will be perfectly fine, but the trade-off from the second flute to the oboe will be just the this will be like a new voice rather than a trade-off from one voice to the other. Very cool the way that you're using bassoons here for those like suspending pitches from below, and then bassoons working with oboes. And this exactly is what I mean by does the treatment of the melody represent an emotional and timbral progression? So you are progressing the timbre, and you are getting more emotional meaning out of the score. And I would say that you could possibly also progress the dynamics a little bit, right? Maybe push us all the way up to a mezzo forte here or something, and then diminuendo to pianissimo. All right, so the way that this is all relating, right? The English horn kind of becoming the dominant figure here amongst the horns. So you just basically kind of have to decide. Like here is an example of where I possibly wouldn't object to the dynamics being the same, even though everything is really kind of on top of everything else, because it's really more about the horns here. There's like some doubling here with the bassoons and so on, and there's some doubling here with the English horn and the clarinets. But it's really obvious that you really want this to be about the horn timbre, right? So like I think maybe an even subtler kind of pushing in. But like if you're thinking, oh no, you got that wrong, Thomas. I want this to be a perfectly blended kind of sound right here. Okay, in that case, come from a pianissimo, go into piano, keep the horns like just 1 degree under, and then diminuendo out. Just everything should be 1 degree under in the horns, and then you'll get a blended sound on these same pitches. Because otherwise, it's really just becomes a horn thing, right? I like the idea of these octave clarinets right in here. It's just really kind of fun. Yeah, I mean it's like with the horns and with the English horn and bassoons and so on and so forth, like working together, it ameliorates the kind of pointiness of the octave clarinets, and also the fact that they're kind of soft, but there still is going to be that edge in the ear. So I want you to think about that. If you don't like that edge, then make the top voice first flute. Okay. All right. So I think that this, like, aside from a few little tweaks and adjustments and stuff, and maybe thinking about whether or not you want certain things to be portato as opposed to just like, I mean, like to a degree, I think that things are maybe just a little too blunt when you are assigning tenuto marks to everything, right? Because like the normal shaped tone, like the normal shape of an articulated note in any wind instrument or brass instrument, is sort of like a sort of a teardrop or dewdrop kind of a sound. Like so there's the attack, and then there's the sustain, and then the player just sort of eases out of the note in a beautiful way, almost imperceptible way. But when you assign a tenuto mark, that is a block, right? The articulation starts and it lasts the same dynamic, and then it cuts off, right? So it is just like a bunch of chonky notes. So if you want that kind of really deliberate chonky sound, then that's what you're going to get here. Maybe you don't intend that. Maybe you intended more of like a legato kind of a sound. You're thinking, oh, well, things will really connect together, right? Then just say legato, and then get rid of all of these extraneous tenuto marks. But the way that it looks like to me, it just really looks very deliberate and very kind of thunking, and that is underlined by the fact that you have like almost no slurs at all, right? Kind of going the opposite of my exasperated repetition of telling people to not just drop the too long slurs onto everything. Okay, so think about some of those things, Eli. Okay, but I mean strong beginning, really strong beginning, and then same thing here, like going forwards. Does the expansion of scope in the piano score represent an expansion and progression of the emotional and timbral qualities? And it does, right? And you are also imbuing some meaning into the middle voice. You are connecting to that middle voice through the way that you're interpreting the left-hand patterns. And I really love this sort of reverse, right? Instead of going, starting low and then going up. One thing I would just be a little concerned about would be a kind of a sense of, just a little sense of kind of glacial sort of, like just a little bit of static chunk checking of the flow of energy by having that, like, these kind of low notes just really just solidly sitting there. You know what I mean? But I mean, I think that, like, you're having them played really softly, and then you have, like, everything else just kind of taking off from there. I do not think that your cellos need to be marked pianissimo, and I think furthermore, you could be adding more nuance to this, to everything. I think you could lean into this. I'm not so sure that I'm totally fine with the way that you've assigned these slurs. I think it'd be a lot better just to slur with each beam group. I think it's just much more natural to the flow of the pitches. I think that works better. Just because, like, here you're saying, start from that low D, jump up an octave, and then run up to all the way up here to E, all under one bow. And it's certainly possible, but it's just not the most natural kind of a thing. It's more of like unaccompanied Bach cello sonata kind of bowing, right? Rather than it is like a kind of a more common thing that, like, a player would be doing a lot in this this kind of genre. So I would say just break that slur in the middle, and then of course, like, these repeated notes. This is possibly one of the strongest features right in here. The fact that you're not going like full tremolo, but you're just doing like 16th note tremolo. I just really think that that's really powerful, especially when you bring in the doubling bass clarinet and bassoon right in here. And I really love the way that you're trading off from second to first bassoon, and then having the second bassoon come back in, with a unison, and then thirds. That's really, really nice. I really love that, Eli. I think that's great. And then having the bass clarinet even out the beginning of each phrase. Such great, it's just very good craft orchestration right in there. Okay, and so going forwards, like, you're keeping the horns in the background. I would say, just make sure they don't get too big. Like, I think getting all the way up to mezzo forte here with all of the brass, obviously the brass just take over everything, right? And it just, like, that's really all you hear there. So if you really are having this scoring where the brass are right on top of the strings and the winds, you just really do have to back them off. I'm sorry to say. This should be piano, crescendo to mezzo piano at the most, right? And then this will all come through clearly, and it'll be a beautiful mixed texture, as opposed to this, which would just be basically the brass blatting away, and the and the winds and the strings kind of just saying, "Hey, we're over here. We're over here behind the brass back here. Remember us?" Right? So that is what's going to happen the way that you've got this all scored. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, and especially, like, bringing in these trombones, right? What is that doing to your poor violas? Right? Okay. But all right, so just talking about the orchestration of the melody, the octaves here, we got the thirds and everything else. I think that works really, really well. And just like the beautiful, luxurious cellos down here, and the glittering harp and the little rolls and so on and so forth. The background bassoons and horns. I think that's a beautiful opening. And then here you open it out, right, with adding more onto this. Blessedly, not octave flutes right in here, octave oboes. I think that's great. Just like the first oboe adding to the A2 flutes, and then down here we got the oboe and English horn playing together. And I think that, like, apart from me complaining, like, constantly making comments about A2 flutes and A2 oboes and so on and so forth, or just pointing out the problems, and then adding the clarinets onto that. That is all moderated by the effect of the doubling with the strings. It just smooths everything out, evens everything out. And I think that this is wise too, just dropping down to A2 clarinets, right, so long as you have the string doubling, right? Yeah, and then this is just really lovely right in here. See, so, like, the loveliness of this is being blasted out of existence by your loud horns and trumpets, right? So seriously, ease off a bit, right? If you're really going to score your brass right on top of your strings, just really, just back them off a bit, all right? Just a little bit. It doesn't have to be much, just a little bit. Come in come in here softly. And maybe even come in like at pianissimo and then push into this, get all the way up to mezzo piano, right? So that they have a bit of a curve to them. Same thing with the contrabassoon. Make the contrabassoon match. Yeah, so yeah, it's just a really cool score. I love the approach. I like the the sort of the sensibility that you've got here, and like I hope you won't take this the wrong way, but I think that it's a common sense sort of approach all throughout, right? As well as being artistic, right? But it's like, these are things that are possible. They are things that give the music, a lot of impact, and they work. So let's use them, right? So I thought that was, this is an example of a score like that really works. Now here, one thing I would possibly adjust is maybe have these chords roll an octave higher, and especially when you get to here, because you're coming in here with mezzo forte brass and timpani rolls and things like that, and especially the horns, that will all just suck the life right out of the harp, right? So if you just bring it up an octave and have the harp reaching up into the heavens, then that will stand out. It has a chance to contribute to the music rather than just getting steamrolled, right, by the obnoxiously loud everybody else who just doesn't really seem to care about the harp trying to be heard occasionally, like the composer wants, right? So you have to put in the insurance. The harpist can't do anything against this onslaught, right? But especially I felt it's right in here, as this comes to a close and it's starting to pick up more energy, the effect of these doubled notes, I just felt really was very effective and strong, right? Just really imaginative. So just great job, Eli. Really enjoyed looking at this. I hope everybody else has as well, and has got some comments for Eli below. And Eli, I hope you've got some comments for Andrew and for our other participants who will be looking at in a second. In fact, I'm just going to go look at those scores now. So stick with me. And let's take a look at the next score in this compilation, with thanks to Eli and to all of our participants in this video. All right, Joe. That's really a beautiful score. I just love the subtleties and how you are shifting the context around so that we have just as I asked for in my criteria, an emotional and timbral progression, right? So there are a few little things, a few little suggestions that I'm going to make along the way. But first, a few tips on proofreading. I'm going to open up the mix here, just to let you know that you had the when you sent this score to me, you had the double bass jacked up all the way to the to as high as it could go, and you had all the other instruments way down in their levels. So it just was a double bass extravaganza. It's just a bit too big on the double bass, right? So I normalized the levels, and that's what everybody is hearing. So I apologize if you really did want the bass that loud and everybody else incredibly soft, but it was really hard to hear a lot of the instruments. Other thing is, I don't know how experienced you are with text and Sibelius. All you got to do is double click on it and then enter your name, right? And that helps me. Because, like, what if scores get mixed up and the, say the file name on a score isn't written in very clearly by whoever is submitting it, and so on, and two very similarly named files get mixed up together, and so on. So this just really is some insurance, just to make sure whatever happens, your name is on that score visually, right? Okay, so now let's get into the nitty-gritty. So I love the way that this starts, like just really simply, with the strings, like and you have avoided dropping in the slurs from the piano part. I would say that like you could slur a little bit more, right? Like for instance, you could have, say, if you added a slur here. Then that would really help the players keep their bows going up and down, and it would sound much more natural, like down, up, down, up, down, right? And then here I would say like avoid slurring over the repeated notes, but you could, go up, down, up, right, slurring together, and then down. So I mean, they're just ways that you can make things obvious for the string players and also sound a little more smooth and more natural. String playing, like string bowing, has a kind of a conversational sound to it. Things come and go. Things, there is pressure and release. There is back and forth, right? And in the same way that flutes or wind instruments have a kind of a conversational quality in the fact that like breathing is circular, right? Or it's not circular breathing, but is cyclical, right? So you breathe out, the players breathe out, and then they breathe in, and so on and so forth when they're not playing. So there's a certain element of that as well. So like learning what the more natural divisions of things are is just really helpful to you as a composer. Like for instance, here I would say like you could just put the slur here, right? And so this would be down, up, right? And then these groups could be slurred, right? You could slur the first half of the bar and then slur it there, right? So and then right here you've got repeated notes under one slur. So what do you mean by that, right? So do you mean that it should be played in a legato style? Do you mean that it should be played in a portato style, like where it's sort of like kind of you have extra pressure from the stomach while maintaining the breath? So like what do you mean, right? So and if you just leave it up to the player, and then here you have two different styles, right? You have the slur here, but you have no slurs there, so it doesn't even matter. That sort of subtlety of this is just going to be completely buried by the up down bow, right, of the second violins. So some things to think about, right? Just like not completely thinking out the choices. And here you're slurring across the downbeat, right? So like we don't really, like all these other players are playing on the downbeat, so why can't the horns, right? Anyway, so just making things match up just sort of gives kind of a cleaner, more cohesive overall kind of a sound. All right, so now let's just really talk about the scoring. That's just little subtleties and points and so on and so forth that I've covered in many other evaluations by now. So let's just talk about the full effect of the scoring. So here you're starting off just all strings, right? And here you're bringing in the clarinets. And I think that there's absolutely no reason why the clarinets cannot have the same length of tones as as your violins and violas here, right? It should be the same. Now, as much as you're doubling in here, right, and bringing in a new color, I would say be careful because the way that this is scored, the clarinets are going to since you don't have any wind doubling on the violins, on the first violins, just on the seconds and violas, the clarinets are going to feel like they are the unique voice here. And then even bringing in this bass clarinet line right in here, the focus is going to be more and more on the middle voice. Now, if that is what you intend, that's perfectly fine. But I feel that it feels a little uneven to me, right? With so much weight at the bottom and so much focus away from the melody so early in the piece, right? So we have not even established the first melodic statement, and you're already distracting from it, right? So does that mean that you shouldn't use clarinets here? No, not at all. But what if the clarinets were toned way down, so that basically they were just thickening this lower voice without really becoming a hugely prominent voice, right? You could bring them in, say, at pianissimo or something like that, so they're more of a blending tone. And the same thing with the bass clarinet, right? Just to really make it much softer in the background. And then here, normalize things. Everybody at the piano dynamic. Now here, since you have, kind of open and shut hairpins, you do not need to restate the dynamic. The players will know that they need to go back to piano here. Right? They don't need to be reminded that they're still piano. So unless something about the overall context changes, then you don't need to remark the dynamics in a situation like this. All right, so now going forwards, I really love this texture that you've got here. First flute doubling the first violins, right, and then you've got like the clarinets reharmonizing what's going on in the violas. Right, and then you've got the horns also playing. One thing that I would say right in here that you really could use would be a little bit more weight on the second violin line, because it's just a bit naked there, right? It really has, like, considering the close proximity of the reharmonization of the clarinets. I would say that really, like, that just needs to be more weight on the second violin line. If you're giving the weight to the first violins, then you need to give a little bit of love to those seconds, because like the violas have so much help here from everybody else in the world, in your world of sound. So does that mean that you should add, like, oh, well, I'll just add an octave here with the flutes? Do not do that, right? Add an instrument that is just very, very comfortable in this, in this area, and has a certain affinity for flute, while not being a flute-like instrument, and that would be the English horn, right? I would just drop in the English horn in here to support second violin. It will blend in beautifully with the second violin and add a complementary sound to the first flute, right? And that is how I would deal with that in there, and then I think you'd have a perfectly balanced kind of a sound right in here. If you want to make it absolutely perfectly balanced, you could drop the horns down to pianissimo. Now, here in this situation where you have two horn players working in close proximity, they're playing like rows of thirds and so on, it is way better to have the partner to the first to be the second horn player rather than the third horn player. Why is this? It's because the third player, should be brought out to partner with the first horn when the parts are kind of high and exclamatory and showing off and that kind of stuff, right? That's like in that case, the third is sort of the assistant first. But there's absolutely zero reason there's zero need for the third to be playing this. They can, and like you see that in a lot of Ravel. Like Ravel will get a part like this, and he'll divide it up between the first and the third. But just because he's doing that doesn't mean that necessarily is a universally, a universal idea. It's like more natural. It's more typical in this kind of scoring for the first to pair up with the second, and the reason for that is that the second is the first's partner in this kind of scoring, right? Like, just really making sure that the intonation is absolutely spot on, that the gestures, the the subtleties, any possible thing about the expression that the first player wants to do, they should have the player sitting right next to them, who's got their eye on them, like their job. The job of the second horn player is to keep their eyes focused on that first player most of the time, right? And just to absolutely match what they're doing in every single, every single fluctuation of intonation and dynamic and nuance and everything else. That is their job. So you're giving the job to the guy who's sitting, or the person who is sitting two seats away, right? And they have less of a solid connection to that player. So my advice would be drop this down one dynamic level, say pianissimo, and then you just get that warm, because like you already have the clarinets in here adding their particular sound to this, right? And then in here, go ahead and push, right? Bring the players out. And this is really lovely in here. The oboes and the flutes. Now here, I've been basically advising against too much A2 in the flutes, but I'd say here, like you are picking up after the sound of the violins, right? So in this case, A2 flutes is totally fine. However, adding a second oboe player here is not necessarily going to make things better, right? I'd say that it probably, you get like a more intense sound, and if that's what you're going for, then that's fine. And you are just essentially just doubling the second. So in that case, it makes sense. But I would actually write it out. If you must do that, then write it out as two separate voices, right? Just have so first voice on top, all the stems going up, and then you have a little rest right here, and then the second voice comes in, playing unison, right? So, yeah. So in that case, I would say that that's fine, right? But just So seeing as how that doubling is coming in, but have the slurs like agree with each other. Just the way that the phrasing is scored is just very kind of. I think that if the entrance of the strings here means something, then it will mean more if the slurs are the same, right? So slurring across all of this, or maybe having an up bow how would I divide this? Either having one slur across or having like a down and then an up, that kind of thing. And then just have that match in the winds, or have the winds cover everything, right? Have your flute just go all the way across to this E. All right, so it's just a wonderful trade-off here of colors. I think it's just a great, it's a great bit of scoring, Joe. I really love it, and I love the role of the horns here in bringing more color and warmth right in here. I would want to have more unity in this push here, right? It's really going to blaze out, and there will be a tendency for your other instruments to get buried. Like, for instance, like the English horn part right in here. It is gone. There's no way that it can contribute anything here. Like your third horn, as you've scored it here, should be second horn, will basically just really cover that pitch, and it's not really adding a lot, right? So I think that to really make this work, I think that the whole orchestra should surge, not just the horns, right? But there is that's one way of thinking. If the surge is fast enough and gets out of the way fast enough, then it's all right. Then don't change things too much, but at least have some kind of a pulse in here. Like you have some push here in the flutes. You're already thinking about that, but shouldn't that also be reflected in your first violins at least? And by the same token, shouldn't that also extend to the oboes and your second violins? And if that's the case, then why isn't everybody else involved, right? So it's just one of these things, like, once it's like picking a scab, right? The more that you pick at it, the more comes off. So watch out for that. But then everything kind of comes back here to being soft, and I think that also makes more sense in definition if there is a surge here and everybody has the same marking and they all come to the same conclusion, right? So yeah, and here's an example of a good reason to have tied dotted half notes here rather than one solid dotted whole note going all the way across. And that is if you really want your diminuendo to start right in the middle and you want to indicate it beyond all doubt, right? Then that is a good reason to do that. However, here you got no excuse, Joe. These should just be dotted whole notes, right? Just a dotted whole note for the whole bar, and then that's the end of it. Yeah, so really great first page. Now, going on to the next page. Spending a little bit more time on this than I intended, but who cares? I'm having fun. So, so we have this lovely wind chorale above. Excuse me. With, clarinets and English horn and flute all mixed together. That's a beautiful sound. My one critique would be that I think we have, once again, phrases interruptus, right? So, this works really, really well. This big, beautiful phrase, but this sort of rest, So I think it takes away from the kind of, that sort of, the energy, right? It just sort of becomes these little bits and bobs. However, my one exception is the fact that you have got this arco and then pizzicato. So it turns into this little waltz kind of a thing. So that is the exception, I think, that makes me not critique this as something that you absolutely have to change. It's just something to think about, the interruption of the flow in here. Is that something that you want when you have such a big, beautiful, smooth phrase above, right? All right, now you have trumpet coming in here. First trumpet, I think that works really nice. And by the way, the realization of the figuration is all fine in here. I have absolutely no problems, except I think the slurs get a bit long right in here. I would actually break up these into up bow, just one slur and then a slur at the slur coming off of that, right? So just divide it in the middle, and then divide this in the middle. And I think that's a bit more. Or you could have one slur per beam group, which would also be the easiest to bow for the players. Okay, so you're coming in here with your first trumpet, right, to add a little bit of energy below here because you are, you're starting to double your the figuration in the strings here, right? So what is happening here that is possibly critical is losing that middle voice, right? And you're not giving it to the horns or anything like that. You're just kind of you're taking it out. So I think the absence of it is an interesting idea. And since a lot of those pitches are in the figuration already, not all of them, but some of them, then it's a gamble worth trying, right? I'm not sure if I completely subscribe to that. Would that be something that I would do? Probably not. But that's the joy of this, right? It doesn't have to be something that I would do, right? I would just make these uniform, either have them all above, like this, or all below, right? I mean, I see how that kind of gets in the way, but yeah, but just move things around a little. Okay. So here you're adding intensity by adding players. So, one was maybe this meant to be 1 and 2 and then A3. Because here you are going, first bassoon and then A2 and so on. Yeah. So I feel like this is possibly too much weight. I think that this is going to be way more brilliant than you imagine. It's just going to have this really fat sound. And I don't think that that's really necessary, right? You're gonna blow your second violins out of the water, and then the resonance above, an octave above, is also going to interfere with the ability to really clearly hear what's going on here in the first violin and flute but also like I'm sorry, I failed to mention that English horn is playing on those same pitches. So yeah, so I think that like I think that it is enough just to go to forte with a single trumpet, right? One trumpet can be heard over the entire orchestra if it's in the right place and it is ringing. So I don't think you need A3 here, right? I mean, you can do an experiment and just add voices, like just to see what it would sound like for yourself. Like, so just add like this, like just select the note and type 1, right? And then another 1. So you end up with 3 voices on the same note. And then just listen to what that sounds like in the playback, right? Just do that to each one of these notes. So it's not so much that it makes it louder, but it just makes it really thick and prominent, right? And it just really takes over the center of the sound picture in a way that's, that like now that you're adding the middle voice, it's like completely unimportant and won't be heard by anybody or appreciated for what it is in these beautiful clarinets, right? So watch out about this A3 thing here. And even watch out about marking forte here. But I mean, I understand. You want this big, loud, you want this clarion call, and you want everybody else to play around it, so that's fine. But just, be careful. I think that the horns here actually work really, really well, the way that they're all positioned and everything else. So yeah, so really, just such a fun score, and and it's just a lot of freshness to it, and it just feels so natural, Joe. So so thanks so much for that. Thanks for your participating in this year's orchestration challenge and the really great work that you put into this entry. Just it's wonderful how how it's got its own voice and and its own sensibility, and it really stands nicely together with all the other scores in this compilation. And with that, thinking about the next score, let's go check that out now. Thank you, Joe. A very stirring entry, Irv. Really, just really like the way that you ended that last phrase. It kind of makes, kind of gives me the feeling of the whole crowd standing up for a national anthem or something like that, or standing up to applaud. And there's a certain gift to being able to score that way, and so I'm not knocking it at all. That's great. I just say that, like in general, for concert scoring, you don't need to go to like blank whole rests, bars of rest. I don't think that that's really needed. I mean, just to sort of compare. Looks perfectly fine with them, as well as without them. Anyway, not to be picky, that's just like your personal style and whatever. But like I'd say in concert scoring, like maybe in some film scoring and some other modern scoring, it's like not needed. But I'd say in this sort of more tonal and more traditional kind of concert scoring, you don't really need that. So just a little. It seems to me like I'm thinking that some of these dynamics may be imported from the original score. So you may not have quite gotten the knack yet of entering engraved, like these beautifully engraved kinds of things. So here's a little review. All right. So you just select the note that you want to write the dynamic under, right, and then you rest your thumb on the Command or Control key and type E, but leave your thumb sitting on that Command or Control key. Command key if you're on Mac, Control key if you're on PC. And then just type the other dynamics while your thumb is still sitting there. Like, for instance, if you needed a forte, just type F, and then you have this big, beautifully, nice, beautifully engraved dynamic. Or pianissimo, my thumb's still sitting on that key. Right? It's the easiest thing in the world. So, like, there's no excuse for you to be typing these non-juicy kinds of dynamics, right? I mean, it just should be. It's like it is more effort to take your thumb off of the key and type something in a plain font than it is for you to leave your thumb on the key, right? So it's like it is one case where a keyboard shortcut is easier to use than to not use. All right. So everybody out there on Sibelius, I don't know what the shortcut is for Dorico or Finale, or if there even is one, but for Sibelius, it's just as easy as can be, right? Okay, all right, so now let's get to the actual scoring. So my only critique for this page overall would be something that is in my evaluation criteria, and you may have already thought of this, Irv, and been thinking like, oh no, he's going to get me on that one little thing. Well, sort of. Sort of yes, sort of no. All right, so my first criterion is, does the treatment of the melody represent an emotional and timbral progression? So the answer to that for this approach is no, because like you didn't make any changes whatsoever, right? So, I mean, you easily could have, even just using the same instruments or the same kinds of instruments, right? You could have, like, when you got to this point, you could have gone to octaves with the piccolo. You could have added, like, a little bit of harmony, maybe from, like, the clarinets incredibly softly, like without really changing the whole nature of what you're doing here. You could have easily, like, made some adjustments and so on and so forth. So, but I mean, it's beautifully, like, it's sort of like elegantly simple, right? But even at that, like, there are some things that you could fix, right? So here you're going crescendo diminuendo from pianissimo, then we have piano, and then after that you have crescendo written in. This is imported from the original piano part, and then diminuendo. So, like, I would submit to you that it is not enough to just use the dynamics that are in the piano part and to, like, drop in invisible hairpins. You also have to sort of tell us where are we headed. Like, crescendo to what? Diminuendo to what? Right? So does this end pianissimo? How does it end? What dynamic? How big is your crescendo? Where is it going? Does it peak here? Are you going crescendo to mezzo forte here, or mezzo piano, or whatever? Or does it go crescendo all the way to here and then start diminuendoing? Like, in that case, maybe the diminuendo could sit here, and then the mezzo piano or mezzo forte could be on this note, right? So, anyway, so it's just some things to think about, like in terms of finalizing the score. Now, I really love the idea of the harp being under the celesta, right? And that makes a whole lot more sense in this type of scoring. Keeping in mind that the relationship of the notes to one another isn't exactly correct, right? Because the celesta is a transposing instrument. So do you really want the celesta to be sounding an octave higher, like an octave separated from the harp? Could you have had fuller chords, like understanding that what is really going on in the celesta on a like a piano or a harp would look like this, right? So these are the actual sounding pitches, right? So if you have that much space, do you want the harp to be right underneath it like this, right? Or do you want to sort of fill in like with the fuller rolled chords underneath the celesta? Like, so there's so many possibilities. And seeing that there are those possibilities and there is that aspect of range, could those be used in ways to alter the texture to bring more meaning, right? So the whole thing is all about meaning, right? So if you go back and listen to the original piano score, the original piano part as played exquisitely, if I might add, by Violina Petruchenko, she makes every little phrase in this prologue into like a separate idea and a new emotional context. And she does that by just using, like, by interpreting the way that Barvinsky uses the colors of the piano, right? And it's of course, like, there's a lot of that is very, very basic, right? There's, I'm not saying that the Prelude in G is this work of incredible genius, I do think that Barvinsky was a really gifted composer, and I think that his Prelude is ingenious, and it's a really great piece of art. Okay, I'm not saying it is like a piano concerto or anything. Okay, but that ability to just really see the to interpret the pianistic color in such beautiful ways and to make it so inviting to the pianist, right, and so easy to interpret, and so, like, I've heard several different interpretations of that, and they're all different, and they all like help out the different qualities of the pianist and so on. So that is what that shifting of emotional context is something I think that, like, you cannot just rely on the same treatment throughout, right? Even if it's the same instruments that have to be used, I think that the music almost demands that you have some sort of shift, whether it's a shift of just changing the octave or changing the way that the middle voice or the lower voice here is interpreted, or just some other kind of quality, or maybe some doubling or some filling out, I think would, and especially like looking at like what you did in the next page. It's just incredibly ingenious, and all of these really cool things and all that other stuff going on. So I'm understanding that you wanted real restraint here, and you wanted to really kind of limit things, and then just have this big, beautiful, bountiful, generous second part. All right, so I get that completely. All right, but I just I can't help wondering if there was more you could do even with a limited soundscape. Right, so, but just in terms of like scoring, I would wonder whether or not the harp, knowing that the celesta sounds an octave higher, whether this harp part could have been an octave higher, or whether it could have been filled in more or whatever. This is all really lovely right in here, this scoring. Yeah, and I like the fact that you really kept it up in the celesta's, the best sounding range of the celesta, and you didn't have the celesta playing this part, right? Because just a tip for everybody who's never scored for a live celesta player, everything below middle C has a sort of a thunky quality, where like the sound of the hammer striking the tone bar inside the celesta, the lower you get, the more the sound of the hammer hitting the bar is a feature of the sound, and the less the actual ringing resonance, the bell-like resonance is. And that's just like, that's part of the charm of the instrument, right? But all that aside, I won't waste any more time for anybody on this. But yeah, so just think about that. Watch some of my other evaluations where I talk about the possible hazards of just dropping the phrasing of the piano onto wind parts and string parts. Okay, all right. So now we're going to go on. And I just felt this was all really lovely right in here. Of course, I'm going to have some things to say about it and so on, but just the overall impression is just great. And I love the way that you build up, and then you just have this pressure right at the end, just really pushing forward. So I'm not sure. I think you intended this to have a roll mark over it, right? So you're rolling into this, but you have these really long pitches, right? So like the only way to get this to crescendo would be for it if it were a roll. The only way for you to really keep this long sustain on there would be if it were rolled as well. But Più mosso, whatever, it's still a very slow tempo. There's no way that that one timpani stroke is going to last the entire bar, right? So it's better just to say piano, sostenuto, and mark dotted quarter notes, or at the most dotted half notes. Okay? But this is unrealistic. And so is this. And really, so is this and all the other dotted whole notes. So one advice I had from a timpani player, and that is, she said, tell us everything you intend, right? And she was saying in terms of like notes that seem to be too long, nuances, things, legato, stuff like that. Just she really wants to know every kind of anything that you mean on the score. But I think she also meant for you to really work out what is possible on the timpani as well, right? Because then you get an even better part, right? This is a little strange. I'm not sure. All right, so you have a mezzo forte and a pianissimo sort of sitting on the same note here. All right. Okay, so I won't worry about that. Let's just talk about the scoring now. Okay. So here we've got we have two instruments whose presence is almost inaudible, right? So there is absolutely no way that a cellista can play up to a fortissimo, which is where this music is headed. There is a scarce opportunity for these notes to sound out in this texture, like this big, beautiful, generous texture. You're bringing in some horns here, poco a poco crescendo. You have, these wonderful warm strings in here, and then the flute on top and everything else. The cellista is just going to disappear into the ruckus, into the intensity of the sound, right? So anytime where the resonance from the orchestra gets intense, the cellista kind of tends to disappear, right? So, what would sound like? How could you get this? How could you get that quality? And the answer would be glockenspiel, right? So if this became a glockenspiel part, and you marked up the dynamic. So this was mezzo piano, poco a poco crescendo. I would just put since there isn't a continuous music here, I would just put I wouldn't even bother marking poco a poco crescendo here. I would just have this entrance be like mezzo forte or whatever, right? So like I would just say maybe marking up the part until it gets to the point of ridiculousness. And then, just really making sure that it is audible. Now, the same problem is happening here for the harp. So this glissando will work. I'm wondering why it doesn't even go a little bit higher, right? Where just like that really has a much more generous sound. So starting from this low E and maybe going up to E an octave higher. And then right here, these rolls, could you hear them in the mock-up? You're not going to hear them in live either. They're just really not going to contribute that much. So the way to get this to really contribute in something that has, like you're getting to mezzo forte horns. I'm assuming I think this pianissimo is a mistake. So I'm just going to move it over here and put the mezzo forte here in your A2 horns, which I'll have something to say about as well. Okay, so I would put these rolls much higher, and I'd make them much bigger, right? Like the harpist can play 4 notes per hand, and they can actually do hand over hand, right? So, and in fact, when I was working on my harp concerto with my soloist, she said, "Oh, I'd really like some hand over hand stuff. I'd like some just write me a chord that has like 12 pitches in it, so that I can just just go all the way up or 16 pitches in it. Just like so, I can just go hand over hand over hand all the way up. I really love doing that stuff. So there are things that harpists enjoy doing. So like when you write them a part, like something that is really featured, just talk to them, connect with them. Danielle Kuntz on she's got a harp notation group, and she also is on the Facebook group. Just ask her, like, what do harpists like to do? And then put that in, right? That's like so many people are putting in things that harpists don't like to do, and they never ask them whether or not they would like to do it. They very rarely ask the harpist, what do you want here, right? So big gushing chords, I think, just so long as they aren't really complex and weird looking and, tone clustery and whatever, that might as well just be glissandos. So I think that, these need to be higher to be heard. And don't be afraid to mark the harp part up. If the whole orchestra is playing mezzo forte, the harp should be like forte, right? And this should be fortissimo. Okay, so now, suspended cymbal, that's all good. You could help decide what kind of roll this is. Like if this is sticks, it'll have a different sound than if it is soft mallets or hard rubber mallets, there's a bunch of different options, right? So educate yourself about them, use them, and so on and so forth. Now let's talk about these horns, all right? Just the scoring of them. So see here you have got the horns working in pairs. That is absolutely beautiful. Is exactly what is needed. This is your first and second horn player working together. Right? Now, if you were thinking, oh, well, this is my first and third horn players working together, and this is actually like everything here is in the right place, because if this is the first and third and this is the second and fourth, then everything is distributed correctly. And even when you get to here, right, if that's the second horn, then that all works out. Okay? Forget about all that. All right? Just hold your horses. There's no need to score 1 and 3 unless you have an extended period of them working together very high, right? In a situation like this should be 1 and 2, right? So that exactly the way that they should work together, like I mentioned in the previous evaluation for this video. Okay, so working together in pairs like this and on these intervals is perfect, right? And then you should just continue that, like first taking the top, second taking the bottom, and then the third and fourth would be doing exactly the same thing. And then here, the same thing, right? And then when you get to here, like this would be the third and that would be the second, right? So you put this G up here with the under the first, and you put this C sharp all by himself over there. Now, as far as A2 is concerned, like on these other chords, that's fine. You could have, since it's a lower tone, you could have this played by both second and fourth. That's fine. Now here, is this supposed to be A2, right? In that case, like what I would do, like this is where you would really want to bring in the third, right? So this could be first and third, but I would still keep the scoring of it normalized, and I would actually have this. All right, to reorganize it, first playing this, and then putting this on the staff under your first, right, and second horn, and then drop this also onto this staff with this playing under it as the fourth, right? And then the second and fourth rising up like this, and then rising up to play this B, right, this extended B, and then the third and the first and the third continuing on playing these rising pitches here. I think that would be a way better way of reorganizing this material. Okay. All right, so now let's focus on the other elements before I run out of time. So you have A2 flutes up here, and I've been cautioning against A2, but I think that it works in this case because you are sort of using it as an extension of like, you know, your first violins, and like, and then you have your violas playing the harmony below it, right? So you are using this as a stack, right? So the first violins are being doubled by the oboes or oboe, and you have the A2 sound up here, and I think that actually works good as doubling from above, and I don't know if it would prevent the first violins from absorbing the sound of the flutes. I don't think that it would if the flute players allow themselves to get absorbed, right? But I think if you add some nuances in there, like bring out the middle of the line, da da da, and I'm not even going to bother mentioning the problems inherent with the way that you have these slurs, but just go check out some of my other evaluations where I go into depth about how you should divide up things so that they're easier to bow and so on, and that the players can bring in more meaning and more nuance to them. Okay, all right, so and then continuing on, you're adding piccolo on top, and that just really gives that it gets serious here. You're going to go up to this high D. That is going to be a very that's going to put pressure on people's ears. I'm not saying it's necessarily bad, but it is something that you'd want to think about. You already have A2 here, and then you're doubling it with oboe, so that's going to be an extremely potent sound. You're already jumping to that here without bringing up the violins. It might be a little late, right? I think that you could possibly bring in octave first violins at this point. All right, this works fine. I like the doubling with the clarinets and the bassoons. I think that is also very, very cool. It's pretty low and grindy down there, but I think that it works great because you've also got the horns contributing right in here. So that helps it all make more sense. All right. And then as far as the interpretation of the figuration, I think it's actually done really nicely. Like this is a bit. The one thing I would say here is like you may be overestimating all of the contrabassoonists in the world, right? By giving them this much to do. It's not that it won't work on contrabassoon, and I'm sure that there are players who could play this beautifully and poetically, but that's not every bassoonist, right? Every bassoonist who has to pick up a contrabassoon who may not be all that experienced with it, right? So I would, at the very least, I would double at least one of these voices, like maybe the second bassoon, right? Coming in here and doubling what the contrabassoon players, or just trading off on this note and having the contrabassoonist just play the first three pitches of each of these bars, right? Rather than the whole, and especially not these really long, like this is very much, I feel that this is rather idealistic, right? But I mean, it's not impossible, don't get me wrong, but it's just, it's really putting a lot of responsibility onto the contrabassoonist in a way that is a little bit outside the regular abilities and focus of what their instrument is all about, right? It's kind of assuming the contrabassoon is sort of like this lark, right? It's not really playing to the instrument's strengths, to put it a better way, right? When you've got these bassoons who could just cover all of these pitches so much better and so much cleaner, right? So that would be my main critique. But I'd say otherwise, like in the other instruments, I think that the interpretation of the figuration is really nice and just feels really natural. So I will once again stop there before I say too much. But I feel that it's real easy to fix all these things and to adjust these things and bring them more into line to get this ready to go to the stands, right? So great work, Irv, and I really appreciate you bringing the score into to my attention as part of the orchestration challenge for this year. I'm just enjoying the wonderful variety and the quality in all of these scores that I'm getting. The amount of effort is just amazing. To have over 150 people just putting so much time and energy and love into these scores. Don't think that I don't think about that. I'm not aware of it. I am, and I'm humbled. So with that, I'm going to thank you, Irv, and then move on to the next evaluation. That's really lovely, Roque. You're really keeping me going uh, with this wonderful interpretation. I just love that, even when there are similarities, things open out into differences and different viewpoints and different personalities of orchestrators. Getting to know people on that level, I feel I get to know people in a way that like maybe their friends and family don't, right? I get to know them artistically and like see like some of their viewpoint and some of their perspective in a different way. Of course, for all I know, everybody could be like really mean, but I'm hoping that that's not true because you're all scoring so delightfully and so nicely. I cannot help but think that that makes you really cool people. So yeah, with that kind of completely unimportant thing that I just said, let's check out how Roque has interpreted this. And I have to say that I have like so little in terms of objections and corrections and suggestions that this might be a little bit shorter, but don't take that the wrong way. I just find a lot to this that is really wonderful. So yeah, so I mean, starting off, I think this is the first time I've seen this idea, which is to have octaves in, and then also the harmonic position below, split up between the oboes, right, with the English horn on the bottom. That's such a lovely idea, and it really ends up having a beautifully radiant sound here. And then you like position that B in the middle here, going to octaves with the second oboe, and then bring in the first clarinet below, or actually in the middle with the English horn below. Sorry. So yeah, I mean, just so cool. And then you go do crescendo right into the piano. I would say make the crescendo cross all three beats, right? So don't just crescendo up to this, but crescendo to the end of the bar, with bassoon coming in. One possible, not really critique, but observation really, is that I feel that like you have some lower lines that you kind of added in, which is totally fine, but they don't really seem to end, right? They don't kind of lead anywhere. So this sort of drops off the planet. So I really feel this rest. It just seems very stark to me. Like I really feel that things aren't really coming to a natural conclusion with this line right in here. And the same thing is true here for these lower cellos and doubled with bass clarinet. Like we're walking downwards, and then I really feel the rest right in here, which maybe I shouldn't be paying attention to, right? All the same, it's just, it really is wonderful, like the colors that you're choosing and the way that you're putting them all together, right? Yeah. So you just, like no critique here, right? You don't really need to restate I think you could state it here because like this is like a re-entrance, right? These are two different functions of the same instrument, right? So the instrument is walking down here, and then it's kind of re-entering with these other instruments in a new position. So yeah, so in that case, the restating piano here is fine. Maybe back this off, but here I think that you don't need to say it again. You've already said it. There it is, right? And especially you don't need to say it again, right? So this one is unnecessary, right? And so is this one. Anyway, what I really love about this is just this wonderful slow glissando, and it doesn't really go far, just going up to this A. I think if it's a glissando up to this A, then you have the roll, right? So I would actually, I would do this. Hang on. Right? Score it like that. and also line from the note head. Okay, so I think that makes a whole lot more visual sense. But yeah, this is a beautiful introduction, and you should have a crescendo here in your harp part, and you should put the dynamic there. Let's turn that off. All right. See, so like that works a whole lot better. And then, pushing into here, I really just love how you have simplified things. A2 is fine here on flutes because you're thickening the violins, so like the sound of the extra added sound of the breath is not as much of an issue. English horn right here, playing an octave below the second violins. That's a cool idea. Which sort of creates a voice crossing with the violas, the function of this line and so on. Just some really great ideas in here, and some of them are very simple, and just overall, I really love the fact that you didn't that like you made your own decisions about phrasing instead of just dropping the piano phrasing onto this. I think you could have had more slurs. You could have maybe had like portato on some of these repeated notes, maybe, or like slurred in some of these pitches, maybe slurred across these lines and so on. But I love the simplicity. So it's like it's not necessarily like you have to have it. Maybe marking like legato, right, on some of these passages, and then the players would just play in a really like they'll change the bow directions, they'll tongue on different notes, but they'll make everything feel really smoothly connected, right? That would be another way of handling it. So just like like I said before, like no huge complaints or I mean, I don't complain about anything anyways, right? But it like I don't really have a whole lot to say in terms of like try this, try that. I think that it's just really imaginatively scored and really nicely done on this first page. And timpani, rolling. Yeah, this is fine. So like, yeah, just rolling forwards and then back, right, to pianissimo. Like actually, if you take the P out, the implication is that you're going to get bigger than pianissimo, right? You're going to roll forwards. It's going to have to be bigger than a pianissimo in order to diminuendo back to pianissimo. So this might be, in some respects, considered a little unnecessary, but it's still all right. Okay, so now this next page, which I just found so charming and so cool. All right, so here you've got cup mutes. There's a little discussion in the in Orchestration Online group right now, and that is just like there is a closed and open position for some cup mutes. So I just sort of brought that up, and a lot of people are saying that their default is to have like a closed cup mute, and I've seen I've actually seen a few scores with the marking open or closed, but it's it's really not that hugely important. A lot of cup mutes don't open, right? So the default idea would be that they would be closed. But I think it wouldn't be a bad idea for people to start mentioning whether things are open or closed. Okay, now, having said all that, I'm just going to jump back for a second to check something. Yeah, just to make sure that my memory isn't playing tricks on me. Okay, so I think you only need 2 horns for this piece, and I think they only need to be on the same staff. Right, here you're saying 1 and 3. This whole approach here of playing octaves is also something that is much more common to see in a relationship between first and second horn, or third and fourth, right? Third on top, fourth on the bottom. Because like that is one of the jobs of the second horn player, is to listen to the first horn player and to just really absolutely track them in every different harmonic relationship. Everything from octaves and fifths and fourths to just really line up. The overtones above both pitches line up beautifully, and are easy to find, to things like minor ninths, diminished fourths, or excuse me, diminished fifths, augmented fourths, I meant to say. Just all kinds of weird positions within a chord voicing. The second is really listening to the first very intensely, and when they're sitting in between the third and the first, and there's a very strange voicing of a chord, they're listening to both players and just really sitting there under both of them usually, and just really adjusting their position to really make sure the intonation works out for the harmony. Sometimes things can be just a teeny bit off with one of the players above them, and the second fixes it a little bit, just with a slight adjustment, right? And it makes it sound right when it maybe isn't quite. Right, so there are a bunch of pitfalls and traps and so on for the second hornist, which, being married to a second horn player, I hear about a lot. But this is a case where the second horn would just lock right into place with the first. So you really don't need third and fourth horns. You just get rid of that, right? For this arrangement, or this length of arrangement. If you've done the entire score, then, you should just share it. That would be fine with me. If you want to drop it onto if you want to make a YouTube video of it and then drop the link onto the Orchestration Online group, that would be fine. But I think that this works fine, just octaves. I'm saying too much. I'll just shut up about it now. But yeah, just score this kind of thing, because that's the relationship between the two players. All right, so so you've got this lovely, wonderful, kind of almost rustic sounding playing right in here. The octave horns and the bassoons, right? The octave horns really kind of enclosing the bassoons, right? And then the little note on the bottom. So the problem with that is it sort of changes the harmonic context a little bit, right? So the whole point of this is to have what sounds like a 6/4 chord on top, right? So, a 6/3 chord. Like here you've got your third, here you've got your sixth relationship between this this sounding D and this sounding B, right? So your 6/3 chord, but it's not really a 6/3 chord in the entire harmonic spectrum, right? Because it is actually a sixth chord, not a 6/3 chord. So, but I mean, that's without getting into the whole geometry of it. The thing is that when you drop the melody note below, it sort of pretends to be a root, right? So you have the pretended root of a B here. So this turns into a B minor chord. So that is the danger. But I will have to say this, having pointed this out in somebody else's evaluation, I think that with the way that you have scored this, because of having just absolutely solid root D, and then also having the A in here as well, the connotation, the perception is back on it really being 6 chords and not 6/3 chords. All right, and then I just love the addition in here of the English horn. I think that works really beautifully in just a little bit of fattening up here of the bottom note here of the bassoons. So it's really strange. The bassoons are in alto clef here. I think you might have intended for them to be in I'm just going to jump up here. Yeah, so how did they get into... I'm just going to erase this, okay? And then come back to... Oops. Darn it. All right. So it keeps wanting to jump back to the other page because I did something on it previously. Okay, so yeah, so I think that you were intending to use a tenor clef, right? So yeah, I mean it's not really necessary. Your highest pitch here is F sharp, right? So I mean it reads a little bit better. Hang on. So that was, darn it. Sorry about this, everybody. You're probably like going, "Oh, Thomas, get it together." All right, so let's put a proper. Right, so like everything that I was telling you about was. Darn it. Sorry, everybody. Bear with me. Been a long day of very joyful, enjoyable evaluating of scores. All right, there we go. Sorry about that, everybody. I should have just done that to begin with. Okay, so yeah, so bassoons in tenor clef and so on. So yeah, so I mean, I think that this all works fine. I love the clarinets coming in here. I think that that's nice. And I really love the idea of pizzicato, right? For the players. I think that you could, like, if my one possible critique here is that I think you could have interpreted more of the actual notes of the original pattern, right? And I mean, I like the trade-off, like the really pronounced contrast between the pizzicato and then going to like the yada. It's really nice between that and the clarinets and bassoons and so on. Yeah, but it just has that really spicy sound to it, and I like that a lot. All right, so like and just like a little bit of more weight here. That's all just so nice. It just brings out another character to what's going on here in the horns and the bassoons, and then bringing in the clarinet voice. Just it manages to without really doing a whole lot different throughout this entire page until you get to around here. It really does manage to bring in enough variation to where there's a sort of a progression of context in the texture, right? So I feel that that's really important, and it does bring a lot into it. And then then you're kind of stacking things on top of here, flutes and so on, and I feel that all of these roles are maintained really nicely. The trumpet here, the bass trombone, the big roll here in the timpani, and everything else. I think it works really nicely. And then just finally here at the end, you've got the bass clarinet and bassoons coming in underneath the cellos and the violas. So cool. I really like this a lot. So like I don't have a lot. Like I mean, maybe I could be giving you a bit more feedback about this and that. Low flutes right in here on top of horns are going to have a bit of a hard sell, right? It would be better if the sustained note was in the clarinets and not in the flutes. But it's just like little picky things like that, right? And then the push here, mezzo forte in the brass and forte in the it's nicely done. So the only thing I would just say about that is like, how come our pizzicato isn't also getting a bit of a boost? Maybe you forgot to put that in, right? I just feel that they're really going to disappear behind this right in here. All right, so those are my observations on your score, Roque. And yeah, once again, a familiar face bringing me another great interpretation of my challenge. And it's almost like there's like each of these contributions from the same person over the course of these years is almost like a book, right, with different chapters in it. Might be worth people looking up. I mean, it's too much time for me to put together, but like, if you could find out where each person had contributed and just like watch their evaluations from year to year, And in some of them you'll see like enormous growth and just people picking up some of the things that I said and making them even better than I ever expected in the next one, and so on. And then just like certain capacities, like for subtlety, or for or for drama, or all these other kinds of things, just developing in each orchestrator, and a lot of wisdom too, like knowing when not to score something rather than when to score something. Just sort of seeing that evolve, and even people who are just totally already stone cold pros, right? You just see how they are developing in their careers, and like their different sensibilities, and how different pieces appeal to them in different ways. So it's all very much appreciated, and I'm observing it all and marveling at it, and just feel so great about it. So with that sentiment, I will thank you, Roque, and we are going to look at our very last evaluation for this nice long video, going into the home stretch now. Here we go. Wow, Travis. So cool to get a score from you, and such a fun and unique arrangement. This is the kind of thing I think that that just there's so many really neat touches, and especially this prologue is just really fun. I mean, I will say that there are a few things, like the way that this, like you brought in those kind of suspending tones from below and harmonized them and so on and so forth. It didn't quite work, like in the context of the flow of the harmony here, I felt, and just in terms of proportions. I mean, I know you want this real shocker right in here, but I just felt it like as we've gone on this long, five nice long bars at 88, I just sort of felt like the need for something to change right in here. And whether that were to be building towards this boom right in here by adding other instruments or changing registers or some other kind of thing, it would have been a relief to the ear, and I think it would have brought more emotional context, and maybe even built up to the surprise with a little bit more of deliberate motion. But just if you just really wanted to sort of shock us right there, then that worked fine. As long as I'm being picky about it, I think that like bringing in the root right in here at the end might have been a more decisive ending, rather than the ending on the mediant. Okay, but I'm not going to be too picky about this. I'm just really enjoying this, and it's also like really kind of fun. This is coming at the end of a very long day, a very happy day of just sitting here and evaluating everybody's scores, and just enjoying the fact that I'm pulling ahead of the game a little bit. I was having massive problems last week in in getting the videos getting these longer videos to to process through the YouTube system. And I know there are people out there who are putting 10-hour videos out like a few hours after they have finished them, and it's just crazy that maybe my channel is not that important, but anyways, I don't really care about that. I just want to make sure that I'm able to keep a steady flow of these videos and comments and everybody joining in and enjoying themselves and seeing their evaluation come up and helping everybody else out. So yeah. Anyway, so let's talk about the scoring. Okay. So I love this real simplicity here. Just the two horns and trumpet right in here. And like I already talked about how this it just harmonically is a little it just feels a little off, the way that this is set up. But I guess the absence of the octave on top and everything else. But yeah, it's still nice and strong, and I like the I like the crescendo right into this. I think on brass that works really great, and just a simple crescendo like this brings out a completely different color, right, to brass. So it's like a way of shifting emotional context. And for what it's worth, this all works fine. I think there could have been some slurs right in here, right? There's a lot of the playing is just very ta 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 ta. So I think that there could have been a little bit more smoothness, right? And especially if you're going to do it across ties, right? If one part is going to be tied, then the other part, going ta 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 ta, right? I think there could be a little bit more smoothness in there to kind of work all together. But this is just so great, just like really felt very Beethoven-like. Nice, like reminded me of Coriolanus or one of his other overtures where he just or some of his symphonic intros. So this all works fine for me. I think it's fun, especially with the timpani under there and crash cymbals and everything else. So I have like zero problems with this, and it's kind of nice to see the strings working together in tremolos alongside the timpani, doing a roll, playing along with the brass here. I think that's just, it's really charming and it's really fun and it works really, really great. Yeah. So, no gripes or nothing. It's just, this felt a little weird. And then also it would have been nice to have some kind of timbral contrast or change of context or some other kind of thing to set this up. In a way that also brought more meaning into the charming melody, right? This is all about sort of charm and elegance and I would say like restraint in the prologue, but there's no need for that, is there? Right? So yeah, just throw caution to the winds and just punch us in the face a couple of times here to make sure that we're awake, and I think that works fine too. So now we get into like a more fluid kind of scoring. I would say here, maybe like a nice long slur marks over these harp lines, and I would say break the break your beam here. I think it's just more confusing, like the way that is scored. I don't think any pro harpist would have any problems reading that, unless like they were, say that there was that they had been like up all night partying, and then they showed up to rehearsal at 10 in the morning, right? So like I would say for that one harpist, just put in a slur covering all of this, have a flag eighth, and then have the next flag, and it's just like also visually clearer too, right? Everything under a big beautiful slur and so on. And I think that would work fine. And I do like the way that you have got your dynamics here with a celesta probably playing, its loudest mezzo piano. Let's face it. and then you've got your winds and the strings sort of burbling along below, and the pizzicato. See, that's just so cool. Like this is all put together so nicely crafted. Yeah. Yeah. Yes, you'll probably get like the concertmaster will probably do this with 2 up bows, right? So this will be like one long down bow and then an up bow on this and an up bow on that, just to get ready to get back into position for this. Yeah. Yep. So celesta playing in octaves, and I would say, like, see, like here you've got the celesta basically doubling the first flute and the second oboe. Remembering, everybody out there who's not that familiar with celesta scoring, that celesta sounds an octave higher, right? It's just like piccolo or any other octave transposition instrument up, right? So I would actually wonder whether or not you could have taken it an additional octave, right? And because like the only gleaming pitches you're really going to hear from this are the ones on the top. The bottom one is going to get swallowed up by what's going on the harp and the resonance of the wind chorale working together here. Okay, so you take it up an octave, then you get this line doubling the flute, and then you get the line above it, right? And then I think it all works together to have this beautiful gleam. The actual place where the pitch is not as important, right? When you have this accumulated resonance here of the upper winds, they already will have this wonderful vibe working together, and especially the way that you've got them interlocked, which I'll talk about in a minute. So like the gleaming, like the pitch being at the right octave or on an octave higher, or whatever, doesn't really matter, because that all gets sort of absorbed anyways. So you don't want it to be absorbed too much. Take it an octave higher, and it could all be played by the right hand of the celesta player. It doesn't have to be spread across 2 hands. So I would just score it as octaves for the right hand of the keyboard player. And they may elect to play it with both hands, but unless you have like a really, like the action on your celesta is really crappy, which happens, then I would just do it with my right hand. All right, and then like this little pizzicato thing here is just devastating. It's just so fun, like under these kind of muttering violins and violas right in here. I think that works great. All right, so now let's talk about the these intersecting winds right in here. So long as everybody is being really soft and being very nice and everything else, and your oboe players are not playing too enormously loud, especially on this low E, then this is workable. However, it would hurt nothing at all in the combination of these tones if your second flute player was playing the B and your first oboist was playing the G. If you just, hear like intersecting the pitches and then hear stacking them, I don't think that would change anything at all, right? I think that it would still work fine. But that's all I'm going to say about it. I think it's, I don't want to overdo the whole, watch out for low flute kind of stuff. I wouldn't say it if people didn't do it too often, but in this case, I think, Travis, you know what you're doing. So I'm not. It's just an observation that I think that like stacking right in here would work better than interpolating, than intersecting the families of instrument. Okay, and then clarinets come in here. This is just so wonderful, like with the harp. It's just so natural, right? And the violas and cellos below. And then just reaching for that in these octaves, right? And I think that this works really, really great. Octaves in both groups. They're really spreading that across the entire group of violins, all 30 players. Hopefully, you get 30, with a little bit of horn in the background, right? It's just as nice. So cool. And then like the harp continuing on. Now, a tempo più mosso, I think. Perhaps the way that you got your tempo set a tempo would be basically going to like dots versus undotted, right? So it would be like a dotted quarter note equals 88, right? Is what Barvinsky means there. So that's why this just really feels incredibly slow rather than piumoso, right? But actually, piumoso, that was my suggestion, because that's really what pianists are doing, right? They're saying, oh, well, I got the prologue over with, and now let's just race into this piece, right? So really, it's more like dotted quarter note equals like 92 or even 96, depending on who you're listening to. I think that Violina strikes exactly the right balance, right? It's a little ambiguous because of some of her slowdowns, like some of her flex in her tempo is almost down to 88. But like then it's 96, or where is it, right? And it's all very natural. It's just that beautiful romantic playing, But on a piece that is semi-impressionistic. So so this all works great. I love the harmonization here in the lower winds and the little flutters right in here and the flutes. You are an experienced, wonderfully talented and innovative, and also at the same time very practical orchestrator, Travis. So who am I to say what's wrong or right in this? Once again, I wonder whether or not in a situation like this, with this much closeness of winds, whether or not stacking would work better for that, for some of the inner voices in here. But I still think it just sounds really, really cool. And I'm glad that you used an A clarinet here. And I just love the way that this is all working. The horns, just a lovely, lovely ending chord right in here. Really easy sixths in your violins, and it's just so nicely crafted and simple. And these little accents here from the glockenspiel, little touches. I think that all works really, really great. And I kind of like the fact that you added so many little professional touches, and so and you could have gone way overboard easily, right? But you didn't. You kept it really it's very imaginative, and it's really all the functions are really great, and and the practicality of it too is not lost on me. I will say, it's really a pity that the mock-up doesn't really allow you to hear the violins in here, which would come out easily in a live performance. So that's the mock-up, people. That is not... if you couldn't hear the violins and violas doing their little burbling in here, that is not on Travis. That is the mock-up. So anyways, I really like this, obviously, to everybody. One thing is, I think you could have pushed with everybody. You get up to mezzo forte here, maybe the marking could have seeped its way down into the strings a little earlier and so on. But anyways, that's all fine. I really love this, and I loved all six of these scores, all of these entries. What a journey, from the beginning to the end here. And it just what wonderful, different qualities, the different temperaments, right, of the different orchestrators, the personalities, some of our, some new faces, and some people who have been coming back for years and years, and the outlook of what this piece means to each of you, that is not lost on me either. That wonderful sense of innovation and individuality, and I'm seeing that in pretty much everyone, like all of the different groups of people who have submitted works in different Patreon categories. Very, very different, huge individuality, right? Some people are, a lot of people are interpreting the opening the same way at the beginning, all wins, and I did that myself. But then where they go from there is always a different direction, and it's always so cool to watch. And that's what makes this worthwhile for me. and makes it so much fun. You know, even right now, like in this time of day for me, which is a little past lunchtime, which I skipped because I was having so much fun. It's just a blast. It's wonderful. So keep them coming. All right, and I will see everybody in the next evaluation video, and hopefully I will see all these orchestrators next year, which is going to be a really, really fun, very, very different kind of an approach to a different type of scoring. See you all very soon, and thanks so much to all.